starting off with the evaluations of functionist account of the family. This happens to be on page number 86. To remind you about a few things before we get started. Number one, what has to be kept in mind is the word over here is evaluation. Evaluation ka jahan term aata hai, the way talking about the pros and the cons both, right? Evaluation doesn't at all mean criticism, because what I've seen is many students they've started mistaking the term evaluation for criticism, right? Evaluations का हिस्सा criticism हो सकता है, but evaluation का मतलब criticism नहीं है. Number one. Number two, to remind you all, like I said, this is on page number 86 from your Cambridge Indoors book. But before this, we have discussed the functionist perspective of on family, followed by the new functionist perspective on family, followed by the arguments against the fit thesis, जो आपकी किताब में arguments against Parsons लिखा हुआ है. ठीक है जी. So these three topics, if you haven't them, you're supposed to do them in order to be able to understand what is happening today, what we're discussing over here. Are we sorted there?
जी
Yes.
सर.
All right. Now, we're starting off with the evaluation of functionist account of the family. Number one, everyone sitting over here does know or should know that functionist perspective is one of the oldest of sociological perspectives. Not only that, when you talk about the functionist perspective, this is the perspective where, I mean, this is where nuclear family started gaining popularity, because it was functionalists who very openly started advocating and supporting the idea of a nuclear family, right? So, and a nuclear family is, for the ones who do not remember, a nuclear family is a family that typically comprises of two generations, that is, a husband, a wife, and few children living together. Now, the first thing. Number two, when you talk about the nuclear family, or when we talk about nuclear family in relation to functionalism over here, it is said that many people believe, that many sociologists believe, that the nuclear family is the most popular family form across board in almost every society. Again, like I said, I'm not saying this, I wouldn't refer to this as a fact either, but yes, not to forget, there are many sociological commentators who very strongly believe in this. Number three, the popularity of nuclear family pretty much reflects in the policies different governments come up with, right? The policies that different governments or different governments and different societies come up with, usually, I mean, these policies, they usually built up keeping in mind a nuclear family only. Okay, so all of this has to be kept in mind. This pretty much, I mean, I think we should give the functionist perspective credit for this as well, right? Because it was, like I said, the functionist perspective that initially very strongly started advocating, supporting a nuclear family, right, as a structure. Having a look at what we have on the screen, functionists were the first sociologists to focus on the importance of family life and to recognize that the two generation nuclear family with adults of both sexes and dependent children was common around the world. They drew attention to the various positive ways in which families provide support for individuals, and in doing so, help to stabilize society. To remind you all the basics on functionalism, if you talk about functionist perspective, functionalists believe every structure in the society works towards the betterment of the society, and since family is another structure, the assumption over here is, according to the functionist perspective, that the family contributes in a positive manner towards stabilizing an adult, towards stabilizing a family, and towards stabilizing the society in large, right? They drew attention to the various positive ways in which family provides support for the individuals, and in doing so, help to stabilize society. The nuclear family remains the type of family that many people live in or hope to live in, and it is still also the type of family that is encouraged by the policies of many governments. In these ways, functions have made important contribution to the study of family, and I believe no one should disagree to this. Yes, their positive contribution towards family or the study of family in sociology is there, and something the majority would agree to. However, we shouldn't forget that functionalism, on the other hand, has its own flaws as well. And if we talk about the flip side of the coin, there are certain things about functionalism that, if you ask me, I'd rather say are an over exaggerated version of reality. Or, in other words, the impression that functionalists leave about family might not work out quite well for everyone. Yes, there are some people who would agree to all the positive aspects of family, but then again, along with these positive aspects, there are certain things that, or there are certain negative aspects that cannot be or should not be ignored either, right? Number one, the functionalist approach developed in the mid 20th century in the US, the mid 20th century in the US, right? We all do know Parsons, Talcott Parsons, a prominent American functionist of the 1960s. He was a middle class American. Oh, it's written here. He was a middle class American. He was a faculty member at the Harvard University. Do you know what? There is a possibility. Just give it a thought. Just give it a thought, right? What I'm saying is Parsons is an American. He's a middle class American. He was popular during the 1960s. Don't you think just because Parsons felt something about a family, it doesn't at all mean it would work out well in the same manner for others too? Don't you think Parsons being a white middle class American, see, white middle class American has his influence, or has his subjectivity, or has its biasness rather towards whatever the portrayal of family is that he chooses to show, right? Had
Yes, sir.
Parsons not been white, had Parsons not been a middle class, from the middle class, had Parsons not been an American, don't you think the possibility of him coming up with this theory would have been low, right? So पार्सन्स का अमेरिकन मिडिल क्लास फैमिली से बिलोंग होना, belong because he belonged to the American middle class, that definitely does reflect in terms of the theory that he tried putting. Do we all understand this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The functionalist approach developed in the mid 20th century in the US and
Yes,
can
sir.
be seen as both being both out of date, because it's the 21st century, it's 2021 now, and as not applying to all other societies, which makes it ethnocentric. Ethnocentric researchers are the researchers that rely too much on a particular culture, right? It might work out well in the same culture, but not necessarily कि वो बाकी cultures पे भी उसी तरीके से काम करेगा. Get it?
Got it,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Now, the accounts of Parsons and others are based on the experience on white middle class Americans at that time, and probably for a fairly brief period, it was possible to believe that a privatized nuclear family was the most common and the best type of family. But then again, we're talking about a particular period, and things have changed in a dramatic manner, right? 1960 से भी अगर हम काउंट करते हैं तो it's been what 60 more years after that. And just because something worked out well for them, we need to rethink, we need to re-scrutinize as to how the portrayal of family according to the functionist perspective does work out for other people in other societies at this point in time as I speak. Get it?
Ji,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Now, differences of social class and ethnicity are absent from functionist account. I mean, it's more like the impression that the functionist perspective left for us. They're leaving us under an impression that it's something like one size fits all वाली policy. मतलब एक ही तरह की family है जिसको ये लोग claim कर रहे हैं happens to be the best family form, and they're claiming that this particular family form would work out well for others as well. जरूरी नहीं है. Like I said, what if Parsons was someone from the working class? What if Parsons was someone from an underclass? What if Parsons was someone from the elite class? Things would have been different. What if Parsons was from an Afro-Caribbean origin? What if Parsons was Parsons Thakur, somewhere from Indian origins, South Asian origins? He wouldn't have probably come up with the same explanation, right? So,
Sir, he wouldn't have those the same privileges that he has in being like middle class
I didn't
American.
I didn't get what you said. Can you repeat that again?
He wouldn't have the same privilege. Like
That,
he has privileges
that's what
right
I'm saying.
now.
Anyways, that's what I just said. So what I'm saying over here is, you know, it isn't the family experience isn't the same for everyone, to sum it up, right? Now, the focus on the functions of the family tends to mean that functions only see the way that the nuclear family contributes in a positive way to the lives of individuals and of society. Functionists idealize this one type of family, which involves exaggerating its positive aspects. The security of the children's upbringing, for example, while downplaying the more negative aspects. Now, this is something that we mentioned a couple of minutes earlier as well. Functionists tend to over exaggerate the good things that a family does for us, while at the same time downplaying or ignoring the negativities or the darker side of family. I mean, if you ask Marxists, they'd have something very different, and I mean they hold a very different view of how a family is and who does it benefit, who it doesn't. If you have a look at the feminist point of view, right, if you have a look at this through the feminist perspective, yes, we all do know feminism को आप लोग अलग अलग categories में divide कर सकते हो. There are different types of feminism, but in general, if you talk about feminists, even they hold a very different perception, a different very different view as to what the family does or what its role is, and what is, I mean, they'd have more to say about what all a family lacks rather than what all a family does for the benefit of an individual, the family, and the society in large, right? Having a look at few of the negative aspects of negative aspects of family life over here. Number one, if we talk about a typical nuclear family, right? I'm referring to a typical nuclear family over here because remember, functionalists, like I said, they very openly support the idea of a nuclear family, right? In that case, if I talk about a typical nuclear family where the husband is a breadwinner and the wife is a homemaker, don't you think this would automatically block women's aspirations, right? The career options that women probably would be dreaming of, you just killing their dreams because you are in a very subtle manner steering them into household roles and responsibilities. Does everyone get this first point?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The blocking of women's aspirations and careers by being stayed into a housewife's role, number one. Number two, the limitation of men's involvement in the expressive and nurturing aspects of family life because of the breadwinner role. At the same time, I mean, if you do not remember, Parsons claimed men are supposed to play instrumental roles, and women, according to him, are supposed to play expressive roles. When I talk about instrumental roles, I'm referring to the breadwinner role, right? Earning money for the family. The question is, why is it that Parsons, specifically Parsons, and functionalists in general are trying to downplay the nurturing role, the expressive role that a man can perform? I mean, the portrayal of a family that they have for us shows a man whose whole sole responsibility is to arrange for the bread and butter of the family. What if a man wants to do beyond that? we do have men over here who are more expressive as compared to how the functionalists portray them to be. They tend to have more of an involvement in the nurturing aspects of family. Do we get this?
Yes, sir.
The
Yes,
third,
sir.
Yes.
the dominance of men in decision making and the abuse of male power through, for example, domestic violence and imposing of punishment, right? The dominance of men in decision making, I think this comes without saying. We do, I mean, this is something we all do see happening, you know. A man tends to hold decision making power because he is usually the breadwinner of the family. This isn't something that we can ignore or we should ignore, because it's something that is very evidently happening around us. Not only around us, this happens pretty much in the Western world too. I mean, sitting over here in a South Asian country, we think out in the West there's total equality and they're all living in an egalitarian society, which is quite contrary to how things are in reality. I mean, theoretically, yes, it does make sense. Practically, no. If you have a look at practical grounds, I know there's a difference between what people are experiencing over here as compared to the experiences they have out in the West. But nonetheless, I mean, still an egalitarian society is, we can say we moving towards an egalitarian society, but we do not have one as yet. Get it?
Yes, sir.
Now, when we talk about this under the heading of the negative aspects that we come to experience when it comes to a family, a typical family, the dominance of men in decision making and the abuse of male power through, for example, domestic violence. It could be threat towards domestic violence, it could be actual domestic violence, or imposing of punishments by men. Get it? Do we?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Number
Yes,
four,
sir.
the lack of support for family members in the privatized nuclear family from wider kin and community. Okay, let me put this into context. Parsons referred to a nuclear family. I mean, it is also referred to as an isolated nuclear family. I'm talking about an isolated nuclear family. We're referring to this as an isolated nuclear family because the assumption is that a nuclear family is somewhat cut off or isolated from the wider kin, right? A nuclear family is somewhat isolated, put separate from the wider kin. And a nuclear family pretty much has to survive on their own, and a nuclear family doesn't have any communal support, any support from their extended family, so on and so forth. Don't you think this is again an over exaggerated version of how things possibly could be like? I mean, why would you say that? Fine, a nuclear family is a family that is considered to be separate, but that doesn't at all mean just because you're living in a nuclear family, you wouldn't get any form of support from your wider kin. Do we get this?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
The last point again, the possibilities of the nuclear family contributing to mental and other problems. Now, again, let me give you a tiny little background to this. If you remember, Parsons claimed that a family has two basic and irreducible functions. The first one was primary socialization, and the second one, according to him, was stabilization of adult personalities, where Parsons was referring to the role that is performed by spouses. Remember when I had said Parsons, according to Parsons, your spouse, especially, was referring to the role of a wife. A spouse plays a very important role when it comes to stabilizing one's personality, and a married man actually stays calm and contained because of the emotional support that he receives from his wife in a self-oriented society like the American society, right? But at the same time, at one extreme, we see Parsons claiming that stabilization of adult personalities is a basic and irreducible or a core function of a family. Don't you think we know of so many instances around and across the globe where families have actually had a huge contribution towards mental health issues of individuals? We do know this, right?
Yes.
Does everyone get this?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
If we have a look at these questions, this question number 65 that we have over here that says, evaluate the functionist view that the nuclear family fits the need of society. Quite a lot of what we just discussed can be a part of this answer. I'm not saying this is only what has to be a part of this answer, but then again, quite a lot of what we just discussed. Get it? Do we get this?
Yes, sir. Ji,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, likewise, if you have a look at this, oops, wait, this. There are more similarities than differences between functionalist and Marxist theories of the family. Explain and assess this view, 26 marks. I mean, if you have a look at this, this is going to help you with what we did today, with what we have done earlier, and with what we would do next. Right? I mean, you could, if you want to take a screenshot of this, you may. All right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Rather, as we take this a step ahead, the functionalist approach also involves failing to recognize the viability of other types of family and of alternatives to the family. You know what? Functionalists, the way they're making it sound like they make a nuclear family like sound like the only viable option for everyone. The question is why? We have so many instances, especially as we speak in this contemporary society of individuals in living in family forms that are very different from how a nuclear family is, and they're doing good for themselves. No, they are, right? तो हमारा ये अज्यूम करना कि न्यूक्लियर फैमिली ही एक वाहिद फैमिली फॉर्म है जो हर किसी को अडेप्ट करनी चाहिए, हर किसी को न्यूक्लियर फैमिली में रहना चाहिए, would be wouldn't really be correct, right? Taking it ahead, it also assumes that the family is distinct and can be separated from other institutions and aspects of life. Wait, let me put this into context first so that you can understand it well. Let me remind you all for the second time. When you talk about the functionist perspective believes the structures in this society, they all have a positive role towards the society, and so is the case with family. But do you remember the concept of organic analogy? Organic analogy,
Yes, sir.
exactly this concept of organic analogy. When you talk about organic analogy, the assumption over here is just like a human body. If you talk about a human body, if you talk about a human being, we have different organs from, I mean, two hands, two eyes, two ears, a nose. It together makes a human being, right? It together makes a human. Likewise, the society has different structures that together makes a society, right? Keeping that in mind, won't don't you think, if according to the concept of organic analogy, the different human parts of a body or the different organs of a human being, they're all interconnected and they're all interdependent on each other, right? They're all interconnected. You know, this hand, this moves. If you can see this hand moves because it's connected to my arm to my shoulder, and my shoulder to the rest of my body, right? It is useful because it is interconnected and it is interdependent, right? Interdependent, yeah. Interdependent, no, it is dependent. Yeah, it's dependent, right? Dependent is the word, yeah. It's all interdependent, again interdependent, yeah, yeah. So the point is, usi तरीके से, how do functionalists talk about talk about the family being a separate institution? I mean, a family doesn't really exist in isolation. A family doesn't really exist in a vacuum. There are other numerous agencies, there are other numerous structures that would be and definitely do have their impact on family. Do we all get this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
हमारा ये अज्यूम करना
Yes,
कि
sir.
family एक distinctively different or separate institution है according to the functionist perspective might not be true. For example, the remaining functions attributed to the family, such as primary socialization, are in fact shared by different agencies, including schools, the media, and the peer group. Now, let me connect it to what we've done earlier. Remember, according when I had mentioned, according to Parsons, there are two basic and irreducible functions of family. The first one being primary socialization. Fine, we agree. The family has a very crucial role to play when it comes to the socialization process individuals are involved in. But then again, is it only the family? Don't you think there are a range of other institutions, from your education system to the media to the peer group to your religion? All of them, they are working alongside with the family.
Yes, sir.
Right now, on the other hand, the family often still plays a considerable role in providing functions it has supposedly lost. Now, according to, if you remember, when we were discussing Ronald Fletcher, we had spoken about the distinction between core functions and peripheral functions. While talking about core functions, what I had said was core functions are the functions that a family used to perform and it still does perform. However, peripheral functions are the functions that a family once used to perform, which are now taken over. I mean, this is something that I said, if you remember, right? According to Fletcher, they are now taken over by a range of other institutions. The question is, have they been taken over by a range of other institutions completely? If we talk about a well established education system being present in many developed countries of the world, don't you think there is, if not equal, there is to quite an extent involvement of family too when it comes to educating a child? A family is present there when it comes to educating a child too, especially during the primary phases and the early secondary phases of education. Parents do have a very important contribution towards the education of their child. तो सिर्फ और सिर्फ एजुकेशन सिस्टम को डेवलप करने से क्या फैमिली का वो रोल खत्म हो गया है? Probably not, right? Likewise, we have healthcare facilities. Oh yes, the more developed a country is, the more established and the more and the fancier the healthcare system over there would be like. But then again, that doesn't at all mean, I mean, one gets to the healthcare system only when, if one is in, not, let me not say only, mostly when it's critical help that is required. You wouldn't run up to a doctor for every bruise, scratch, itch, or ache. You wouldn't, right? So the family
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
contribution over here as well. उसी तरीके से financial support. Yes, there are numerous financial institutions that have their own contribution towards, I mean, they play a very important role when it comes to helping individuals or helping families out when they require financial support. But then again, we get financial support from a wider kin as well, and that works out even more in our part of the world. If we're short on cash, if we short on funds, we probably look for support from our wider kin first, our siblings maybe, or our family members beyond our nuclear family. तो वी कैन नॉट जस्ट से कि हमारे पास फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट का फंक्शन अब खत्म हो गया, ये खत्म नहीं हुआ है, राइट?
Yes, sir.
As I speak, I'm talking about scrutinizing the functionist perspective, and I've said this numerous times earlier as well. While I explain a perspective to you, I'd sound like a very strong supporter of that perspective, but I'm doing this so that you understand this better, right? Families play an important role in society, but in conjunction with other parts of society. Functionalists tend to see socialization as a one way process. I like this one. Parsons was amazing when he claimed that A family socializes individuals into recognizable human beings, helping them learn the norms, values, cultures, tradition, custom of a society. Don't you think he made everything sound too idealistic? Do you actually think it happens this way when you talk about, I mean, practically speaking, don't you think they're making it sound like a one way process? You teaching kids and they're learning whatever you teaching them. There are children who literally make their parents go crazy. They have their own, what's the word for it, they have their own, what do you call it, they have, I mean, parents literally have to negotiate with them. Talk about kids, toddlers having food these days. Majority of the cases for the ones who are sitting over here, ask around. If you have toddlers at home or around, YouTube ke baghair they wouldn't be ready to eat food. They literally twist their parents around the little finger. So us assuming that family is a one-way process like Parsons claimed it to be like doesn't seem quite real, doesn't seem like something one can absorb. Probably it might have happened, might, right? It probably might have happened back in the days when Parsons was there. It very evidently does not happen today. And the assumption that a family makes children go through a socialization process that's a one way process is probably too outdated. Get it? In primary
Yes,
socialization,
sir.
children absorb the norms and values of society from the close family. While this can help to explain how norms and values survive over time, even as new generations replace older ones, most sociologists see socialization as a two-way process of interaction. Children influence parents as well as parents influencing children. What happens in socialization is more complicated than a process of transferring norms and values from parents to children who in as well as parents. What happens in socialization is more complicated than a process of transferring norms and values from parents to children who in the functionist approach can seem like empty vessels. They clearly not empty vessels. It's not an empty vessel. You keep on adding up the norms, values, what's acceptable, the goods in them, and they'd keep on gathering them all together. It does not work like that. They're not an empty vessel, and you're not the only institution, you're not the only source that is trying to socialize them. Get it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What happens in socialization is more complicated than a process of transferring norms and values from parents to children who in the functionist approach can seem like empty vessels rather than individuals with their own personalities already. Because when parents are doing their parenting, children at the same time are being influential enough to make things happen, if not completely, maybe partially, the way they want them to happen. Do we get
Yes,
this?
sir.
Yes, sir.
Does
G,
everyone
sir.
understand this? Does everyone understand this?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
In that case, let's wrap it up. Take care of yourselves. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble. Spread positivity. Spread smiles.